I remembered like hit the pavement, got guns over us, and I was like, Australia, let's make this happen. Come on. What I always stress with people when I talk to them is saying like I'm the 1%. The 99% of people literally don't have the skills or the money to be able to immigrate.
You can be the top 1 to 5% of the wealth in your population, and all you want to do with that is leave your family behind.
I've got quite a different relationship with money in the sense where I look at money actually now as it just equals freedom and optionality. That's really like the equation.
Well, hello, human. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Be You Get Paid podcast. I'm your host, Amy Taylor, and I have one goal by being in your ears: to explore as many conversations and perspectives as possible on stuff we did not learn in school. Stuff that would have actually helped a lot more of us thrive rather than just survive as grown-ups in an often challenging and ever-changing world. As the title might suggest, this includes anything involved with knowing ourselves, understanding money, and generally anything that might offer some insight into how we can all be happier humans. With that in mind, wherever you're listening, you'll find links to some of the best resources I have personally found to help with all of those things. Sometimes I'll talk about these in a bit more detail, and I want you to know I will only ever recommend products, services, and companies that I am a customer or user of myself. Now, we're all grown-ups here, and as such, you'll possibly hear the occasional use of grown-up language. More importantly, anything discussed here is personal opinion and intended for conversational and educational purposes only, and should not be taken as financial or investment advice. That's the housekeeping done. Let's get into what I hope is some helpful chat. Connected on Twitter, a Twitter Bitcoiner. There's many of us.
Yes.
I didn't even really use Twitter until I got into Bitcoin, and then everyone was like, you need to be on Twitter, and it's just very quickly become my favourite platform. And now Elon Musk has taken it over, and I actually really like it. I know there's as much vitriol, and we'll get into that, by the way. There's as much vitriol and low-level comments as there are on any other platform, but you generally I find the people on Twitter are extremely smart for the most part, especially anyone remotely discussing money, Bitcoin. It's great. So thank you for joining me. I did that very human thing when we connected, of just subconsciously having an image in my head, and then I listened to one of your podcasts and heard that you were South African, and I was like, this does not fit my pre-framing of what I've assumed. So how long have you been in Australia?
5 years, over 5. We came in April 2018.
Yeah.
So, I'm like 39 now. So, when I was 34, the
ripe old age.
Almost
as old as me. I was going to ask you if you were a millennial. Yeah. Good. Perfect. No,
I'm actually at the back end of it, apparently.
I'm clinging on. I'm like, I am a millennial, but one of the the wise elders, hopefully.
We certainly are.
So, what brought you over here? Presumably from South Africa.
Yeah, economic migrant, you could say. Do you know what I mean? Like, primarily, if you think about South Africa long term, it's not a great place to raise a child. It's pretty violent, unfortunately. So the crime had gotten really bad. We were held up at gunpoint, and that was even after the fact of deciding we were coming to Australia. So that was like, I remembered like hit the pavement, got guns over us, and I was like, Australia, let's make this happen. Come on. So
this is you and your wife were held up at gunpoint, you're saying?
Yes, exactly. So it was weird because we were actually just outside a mate's house whose bell wasn't working, and we were there to talk about them looking after our cats while we were in Australia and then sending them across. So it was just like, it was just really bad luck, and that kind of just sealed the deal and made it really easy to assimilate, because I was like, I'm done. It's like, it's almost like a woman who gets beaten by a husband and then decides enough's enough. It's just like, no, this relationship is over. Mm-hmm. I'll always go back. I'll always have a special place in my heart for Africa, but it's done. So,
are your family
and
still
also
there?
Just like, my parents are there. It's a bit of a convoluted story, but my sister's in Auckland.
Okay.
I've only got a sister, so she's 3 years younger. She's in Auckland. And my parents are in Cape Town, and but they are in the process of trying to organise all sorts of different kind of options. So they, before we came to Australasia, they were doing the whole sort of golden visa thing with Portugal, Then we kind of changed ship, and we're going, okay, we're here. So now my dad's looking at an investment visa in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And they've just spent the last 4 months there, and they're like, oh, New Zealand's pretty shit, respectfully. They don't like it. So they're kind of like, okay,
Won't disagree.
we actually want to try and make something happen here. And there's like some sort of visa where if the balance of your children are in Australia, you can apply as parents for permanent residence. So that's going to be the plan.
Well, that would,
it's a bit sad, but
I mean, maybe you should all just go. If you're all in Bitcoin, you should just all go to Portugal, as far as I'm concerned. But if you've got connections here, but anyway, let's move on from that. I've got a similar story. My mum's over here. I can probably tell you what my experience of that was, albeit she came from the UK. What
Yes.
do you tell me? Well, I generally try and sort of go through people's origin story. Where did you grow up? Yada yada. But I feel it would make more sense to loop back to that with you, because you've probably got some really interesting stories, including being held up at gunpoint. So fast forward through childhood, like going into, I find that millennials talk a lot about career choices. And what did you sort of, in South Africa presumably, what was your first job out of college, uni? Did you do the uni thing?
Yes. So I think when I was young, what I always thought I wanted to be was what they call like a game ranger, like the guy, just the safari guide, you know.
Yep, they're great.
Yeah, totally.
I've been.
It's
I've
quite
done,
funny.
I've done Kruger.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, no, there's actually nothing quite as magic. But yeah, so that was the kind of the thought at some point. But out of uni, I did, like everyone, I did kind of hospitality. So I was from about the age of 16. Yeah, I was a waiter in all sorts of restaurants, pizza places, and all that kind of stuff. Really just pocket money. And then in uni, part-time, what I did was actually deliver fruit and veg to incredibly wealthy people. And I used to have this car called the City Golf. I mean, most people don't even know what that is, but it's like the smallest VW you can possibly buy. And I would literally just stuff this whole car full of fruit and veg and smash it out in 3 or 4 hours. And that was just my party money. So I did that probably for like 3 or 4 years during uni.
Studying what though?
So I started out, So I did a BA law, and political philosophy. So that was the kind of the first bit, and loved philosophy, but that's not a job. Does teach you how to think, teach you how to reason, which is rad. So I loved it, and it got me thinking about all sorts of things. There was some subjects that were like a game changer for me, like this thing called it was called applied ethics, and it was about the morality of homosexuality. And you might have grown up in an environment where some people might have thought there was something wrong with it, and then literally you go through every single argument. It's abnormal, but being left-handed is abnormal. Okay, yeah, it's not natural, but wearing glasses on your nose is not natural. And you're like, shit, okay, this doesn't make sense.
So kind of critical thinking as well.
Yes, totally. So that was quite
more so
really
than
cool.
Anyone else than you learn anywhere else. Sorry, you generally was that something you had to do with law? Did you have to do philosophy with law?
No.
Oh,
no, it was optional. So I originally contemplated doing like a double degree, like in psychology and law, but people that I spoke to just said it was too hard. I enjoyed psychology too, so I did that for a couple of years too. But eventually, you kind of have to pick a lane, and I thought it was suggested to me to do would it be like an LLB, but it would be a BCom LLB, so do finance. But being Dale and kind of just saying no off the bat, because my dad's a chartered accountant, so he was like, that'd be a good idea, and I was like, no. So I just did an arts degree and a law degree, and then later on, quite a bit later, so like, gosh, I mean, I don't even know how long, maybe like a decade later, I did
Hold on, before you go a decade,
property.
Before you jump to a decade later, did you choose to do law thinking being a lawyer is a good career for good money?
I definitely did like the idea of money. It was the weird thing was I was thinking, I suppose, like, it's a little bit of a juvenile thought, but you kind of go, yeah, having money allows you to do things, allows you to buy things. And maybe I should like go back a few steps just to kind of frame my relationship with money, because it's the way I thought about it. Because
totally, please do.
Yeah. So my family, both my mom and my dad, they grew up in very modest homes in a small mining town called Springs in South Africa. It's a gold mining town. And they didn't come from any wealth or anything like that, working class families. My dad's mom was a bank teller for 35 years, etc., that kind of stuff. And when they first bought my parents bought their first home, it was a 1-bedroom, and within a few years, interest rates were up at like 18%. And my mom was saying, like, she's told me these stories about how they used to just cry because they're, not both of them, but my mom would be crying, going like, I don't know how we're going to pay the bills, kind of thing. So my dad would go out, and he was doing his articles at the time, and I was basically in this 1-bedroom in a small little garden. My mom and I would literally just work in the garden, and apparently I just got really brown and tanned and played in a bucket and that kind of stuff. So we grew up relatively poor, but for whatever reason, my dad had like a crazy drive in him. And the result was that I didn't actually spend a lot of time with him, but he managed to really just apply himself and progress from one sort of role to the next. And long story short, eventually him and a bunch of other guys created a business that was the first formal retail that townships in South Africa ever had. So prior to that, it was spaza shops. Basically, you can imagine just like a sole trader who just goes and buys 2-kilogram bags of maize and that kind of stuff. And none of the suppliers would go into the townships because it's too dangerous. So if you're like a bread company, you're not going to go in there because you get hijacked. So what they did was they had a model where the staff owned half, or the management owned half, and then they owned the other half. And so all the suppliers started coming back. And that was the first formal retail for the African townships. And then they sold that business to a Coles type it's called Pick and Pay, who actually accepts Bitcoin now, which is funny. But
for anyone who's not Australian, Coles is a supermarket chain.
Sorry?
I was just explaining that Coles is a supermarket chain for anyone who's not Australian.
Yes.
So they became that, or they sold the business to that chain?
So they sold the business to this large
company.
Supermarket chain, and essentially, as a result, we then, he obviously stumbled across like a big amount of money, and that is when we decided to relocate, and we went to Cape Town. And I went from being like in a pretty modest, like normal home, because my parents were in flash and everything, to living in a really prestigious estate in a really nice area in Cape Town. So it was like, I don't want to say like a rags to riches story, but it is like it's pretty cool. And so as a result of my formative years, my teenage years, actually growing up in an environment where kids were getting sort of 3 Series BMWs as their first car, I couldn't, like, my dad would be like, oh my God, that doesn't make any sense. He was always very grounded, and I've never just been impressed by that. And so as a result, like, I've got quite a different relationship with money, in the sense where I look at money actually now as it just equals freedom and optionality. That's really like the equation. It's not about equals
really
things.
Served you, because apart from the fact that you're in South Africa, well, especially the fact that you're in South Africa, it just would have made you a target, which it sounds like you later experienced what that is like. So
yes, exactly. And unfortunately, like, I think the reality is everyone's a target there. Life's very cheap there, but obviously the fact is that if you've got more, you do have to protect it, and so you don't really get much help from the government, so you need to get private security and private healthcare,
or
and
move overseas.
All the other
There's
things.
so many South Africans overseas, tons.
Exactly. And what I always stress with people when I talk to them is saying, like, I'm the 1%. The 99% of people literally don't have the skills or the money to be able to immigrate.
To leave,
so I'm blessed
exactly.
in many ways.
It's a bit like the Brazilians as well. There's a big Brazilian market here, or I say market, Brazilian population here and in New Zealand as well. And,
yes.
I don't think people realise, as much as they are the 1 or top 5% of their population, the choice, it's a contradiction, isn't it? It's like, you can be the top 1 to 5% of the wealth in your population, and all you want to do with that is leave your family behind. Like it's like more money, more problems in a way. It's an escape, but that's a sacrifice. It's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah.
So you went into law. I want to get to the point where you ended up working in mainstream media, because I was listening to you interview someone else on your podcast, and it's that moment where you started questioning something. Bitcoin may have come later, but you said I think it was Michael Dunworth you were talking to, and you ended up, take me through the story to where you ended up working in mainstream media, and you started questioning something for the first time.
To put the pieces together, I'll literally just fast forward through like 12 years.
Yeah.
Because basically I did my law articles and did commercial law. I knew in like 2 weeks that this is not going to work. The secretary who I was working for said, like, I know you're not going to be a lawyer. And I was like, shh, don't tell anyone. And then shortly after that, once I qualified and became a lawyer, then it was like, okay, I did a bit of legal compliance work, moved across to commercial property. And, not necessarily like passionate about it, but, that's what you do. And so we moved across here in 2018 now, and went straight into commercial property, as you do. And for the first time in my life, I had multiple offers. And that didn't ever happen in South Africa, which was quite unique. It's like a pure meritocracy, yeah. And I'm like, yeah. Good and pay. So I was like, woo, this is a dream. So, so then in 2020, my wife and I make the bold move to pack up and go to the Northern Rivers region to go live in Casuarina. And this is all just as COVID's happening, and she was literally like, "We need to pack up, we need to go." And so we packed up.
Were you in Sydney?
In Adelaide.
No. Oh, Adelaide. Okay. Oh God. Okay, yes. That's a big move. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were just literally like, our house was full, and we literally got our cat and our dog, packed the car, and we raced to the border. We got to Broken Hill, and we're like, phew, we're in. Because we had to live in a regional area. So the long and the short of it is that we lived in Northern Rivers primarily because I had to live in a regional area. I had to work in a regional area, or I could do remote work, but I couldn't literally go across the border and be a waiter in, Coolangatta, 10 kilometers away, as an example. That's just the way it worked. So I needed to find a way to earn an income. And I then decided, okay, well, may as well try and study a bit more in finance, because I've always found it interesting. And then I started coming across Bitcoin, and I was like, whoa. And that's kind of where I started doing a deep dive. I wrote like an 80-page dissertation. Then I was like, I want to work in this space. How do I work in it? Well, Bitcoin's like gold, like I can't work for gold. So what I do, I applied for lots of different kind of roles and ended up as a managing editor at a crypto publication. So I was a Bitcoiner before I got into crypto media, and that was about a year with that crowd. And that then got sold to an exchange. I'll tell you offline who they are. You can just read at the bottom of the website if you want, the T's and C's. And then I moved across to another business that was recently started by Nine Network. And that's when I really got kind of hit in the face with mainstream media.
Mainstream Channel 9 here.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
So it was a publication that was within a stable of publications owned by a group called the Pedestrian Group, which is like a youth-focused group that like had Vice and a few others. And then on top of that group was Nine. So Nine they called them Big Daddy Nine. Yeah. That's how it worked.
So they were a subsidiary of the mainstream media that you were then working for. Okay, carry on.
Correct, but it essentially had all the qualities of working for mainstream media because...
So you'd already worked in crypto and you knew Bitcoin before you worked in... I thought it was the other way around from listening to you before, but that's really interesting. So
yes.
You already had the bit of the conspiracy theorist hat on to a degree, because that's what I think a lot of us are seen as by the outside world, or those who don't understand why we get so passionate. And I think especially
Absolutely.
2020 was a year where if you questioned one thing, if you already knew Bitcoin, or if you'd started to look down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the dots just started to join very, very quickly by following money. And it was just such a fractious, divided time, and it still is. But it's interesting that you'd already gone down that rabbit hole and then worked in mainstream media. So what came next?
You're right. Yeah, it was a weird time, and funnily enough, all the conspiracy theorists are increasingly accurate by the day. We could say, which is very vindicating, and so many of the things that I'm so stoked that finally, like, the truth is being unveiled, but it takes so long. So, yeah, as you said, I was a Bitcoiner before I started working in crypto, so I didn't believe in crypto for like a day, not one day. I wasn't tricked. I knew it was all BS, right? I just knew it was all scams, but I had to find a way to try and work in Bitcoin, and that was kind of my opportunity. And it was then towards, I've lost track now, but it was a really challenging period because, especially working for mainstream media and like Nine, the kind of the cultural side, the work politics, I just didn't jive with. So I originally had sort of Bitcoin as my pronoun on LinkedIn, and I had to remove that. Everyone had their pronouns in the email, and I was just like, there's just no ways I can do this. So I removed it. It was noticeable, and I started losing like a little bit of me. It sounds like a little bit extreme, but my wife and I would go for walks every day with our dog, and I would just complain the whole time. And it's just like, I know that that's always a signal in my body that I'm not well, you know? Yeah. And eventually I just was like, do you know what, this is, it's actually with the support of my wife. She just said, like, just pack it up, man. Just, walk away. It's not worth it.
But what were you reporting on? Sorry to cut you off. What was your job in that environment?
So the first thing is it's all garbage, Amy. Basically, it was Web3. Okay, and the people that were talking about it didn't understand it. It's all buzzwords. It's all marketing. Truth is irrelevant. Nobody knows what's happening. What was so wonderful was, and this is a story you might appreciate, SBF was exposed during my stint. Sam Bankman-Fried, the notorious...
FTX,
I think the biggest criminal in crypto thus far. And as this is happening, I thought, this is my opportunity. And I've said this in other podcasts, so I'll try and put it a little differently, but I thought this is my chance to try and like orange pill this publication. Because I'd always said, guys, why don't you try and have a little bit of a foot in Bitcoin and a little bit in Web3 crypto? Because I think when it pivots and reality hits, you want to be able to say, hey, we still had a bit of signal. At the moment, it's just noise. That was just my kind of 5 cents. Yeah. And I guess long story short, I eventually decided, like, we need to figure out some of these things. Like, we keep saying decentralization. Can anyone even explain to me what you're talking about? Like, explain, literally tell me what you mean. And people would be kind of a little confused. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a presentation for the team, and let's try and like figure this one out. And sort of 10 minutes into my presentation, the CEO was just like, hey, stop. Hey, it sounds like you're trying to sell me on Bitcoin here. So I'm like, no, I'm trying to just sort of uncover something. Like, all these people that I've been following, like, my Twitter timeline's different to yours. Everyone knew this was inevitable. They knew FTX, they knew Celsius, they knew BlockFi, they knew all of these crypto companies that were either, engaged, all sorts of, let's just call it degenerate behavior. And, Corey Clipston, from Swan, was one of the guys calling it out. And so I was like, I follow Corey and he's called all this stuff out. And he's like, oh, he's that crazy Maxi. I'm like, yeah, crazy means true. Taking a lot of heat
for it as well, but he's been proven extremely reliable with his track record.
He's a sharpshooter, and he knows. That's why I back him, because he doesn't make claims that he can't back up. And he's got a really good record. And another guy is Mike Alfred. He is very good in being able to call BS on some stuff. And like, just as an FYI to anyone who's listening who's interested, Binance is the biggest red flag in the industry, and we'll see what happens to that thing. I think it's going to blow up probably in the next 3 to 5 years, but these things can happen quite slowly, gradually then suddenly, you could say.
Yeah. Well, the side note, and we'll come back to this topic with the Bitcoin not crypto argument. The argument is always, well, not the argument, the basic advice is, if you're buying Bitcoin, wherever you're buying it, you just get it off the exchange. I don't care if it's the most reliable exchange in the world. It's been proven in the last couple of weeks. Like, even the most well-intended Bitcoin only exchanges can fall prey to whoever's behind them, right? Like insurance companies with underwriters. Ultimately, there's layers to this stuff, but the whole point of Bitcoin is this, or the fundamental intention is that you hold it yourself. It self-custodies, and it puts the responsibility back in the individual's hands. And unfortunately, far too many people don't seem to want that responsibility, which leads into another whole conversation, which is how we were. Correct, and that's a great segue into, you trusted yourself and your intuition to walk away from your job because I think, again, you'd already gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but this whole questioning of mainstream media or things that we've been, told or read, and for years you just never had a reason to question it. And I think one thing you said on your episode with Michael was just, when you see that something's not true, it's quite frightening to start peeling back all these layers of like, well, what else isn't true? And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing a great job of terrifyingly, but also, I guess it's inspiring, it's hopeful and optimistic that someone in a position of some degree of power or influence is actually now willing to be out there being a voice for this stuff, and not just for Bitcoin, but for where this interwoven web of influence, power, manipulation all comes together. And it's not very nice, but it's, there is hope. That's what I'm always ranting about this stuff on Instagram and social media, but it's like, but there is this thing called Bitcoin that offers hope on so many levels, but it takes a very long time to piece it all together.
Exactly. And I think, I actually don't even know what the name of this phenomenon is, but once you've got an expertise in something and you read about it in a publication and it's so wrong, that's when you should start going, okay, what else are you wrong about? Yeah. And what's happened with mainstream media is through just the democratization of information, we don't need to I don't need to know what's happening, in front of the courts in Brisbane. I can probably just hop onto some sort of, guy who's live streaming it via Twitter. I can get real-time stuff from people on the ground. Like, that's what's happening, and I don't need your commentary. I don't need your bias, whether it's left or right. Like, I know that you've got a corporate agenda, and we've got receipts. We've seen it all. Like, not to make this about Rona, but you just have a look at the amount of videos circulating today, which is like, okay, it's safe and effective. No, okay, it's not quite, but it's a little bit. And then it's like, it keeps on. The narrative kept shifting, and then it's like. There were people paying attention from day dot, but they were told they were idiots. So I'm very, very hopeful, but I tend to think that things are going to get much worse than they get in the short to medium term.
And do you think
it's one of those things?
You hear people ask this question a lot. Do you think what goes on in mainstream media, as someone who's been in there, albeit in a micro niche of it, do you think what happens there is intentionally, nefarious and malicious, or do you think it's just people doing the same thing they've always done because they're given a handover and a set of rules and a operating manual and a job description? Do you think it's a bit of both? Like, where do you sit with that?
Unfortunately, there's no easy answer. So I know, for example, working at the One Crypto publication, whenever there were red flags around Binance, we couldn't say anything because they were paying us. So excuse me. So that's an example where you've got a conflict of interest, and if it's free and people aren't paying for news, then you're the product. So much like Facebook or Instagram, that's just how it works. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is, if you've got it is just business, and literally they're just monetizing your eyeballs. So if you think, and then the next kind of layer is, how do these things make money? They require corporate sponsors. Okay. So at the end of the day, if nobody's paying, you understand the incentive. So they're not necessarily, so truth is kind of secondary. So that's, I guess, the first thing. The second thing is then people would gravitate to various publications depending on their political ideology. Yeah. So for example, Nine is very woke. It's very woke. It is what it is. And I could immediately tell that I was out. There were a couple of weird signals, like when you do your little questionnaire in the beginning of it's like here's 10 questions about you to introduce you to the team via Slack. And the one was like, who would you like to be in a lift with? And I had to like think really hard, because I know, okay, if I say this is how I'll be perceived. And I want to say Joe Rogan. He's my boy. But I couldn't say that. So I had to be like, who is someone who I love but is tolerable from the leftists? And I was like, Ricky Gervais, love him. So that's the kind of thing. So the people there all have groupthink, and they can't think differently. Unfortunately, they're there, and it's like you're part of a team. And it's like, okay, I'm on Team Bitcoin, and if some guy, shitcoiner, came and infiltrated and tried to push some message at a Bitcoin meetup, I'd be like, listen, man, this is not the forum. It's the same in the media. It's like, I worked in a leftist organization and they all think the same. There's no room for diversity there. I've thought every other one, by the way.
I saw someone tweet, and I nearly jumped in and said this when you mentioned having Bitcoin in your pronouns. I saw someone say the other day on Twitter that they didn't want to use pronouns in their bio. I don't think it was a social media profile, but I think it was like their intranet. Is that even a thing anymore? But their internal staff platform or whatever it was they had. And there's a space for pronouns, and everyone was told you must use pronouns. And even that was just not okay. And it's just like workplaces are just becoming so toxic. And, you know, the reports that I read from Gallup, which is affiliated with the coaching I do, is like, they do these polls of workplaces around the world and how people are feeling, and it's way up now into the 70% range of people that want hybrid or remote work. That's how high like it's gone since experiencing the option. And it makes you wonder, well, how much of that is because of toxic workplace culture, like things like that.
Yeah, it's funny, that thing you just described happened to me, exactly that. No jokes. So,
what, you must use pronouns?
Well, okay. So, some beta male. I'm very opinionated, so excuse me. But like some beta male in a cardigan from Melbourne, literally, like and he comes out and he's like, "We all need to update our Slack profiles, and here are some guidelines." And then it was like all about the profiles and stuff. Plus, stop with these silly characters. We need a real picture of you. So in my mind, I was like, fuck off, I'm not doing this, okay? I had my laser eyes like I do on Twitter, and I'm not changing I'm not putting a pronoun there. And then some people had put like their pronouns at the top, and suddenly it was like, you know, you can imagine sort of Amy, Taylor, they, them, but then the they would cut off, and then it was like, no, you're not putting the pronouns in the right place. So you think to yourself like, okay, this is actually happening, and what's kind of strange is and you know what's quite funny is, and this might be something, it's just something I thought about, but there is, I think, a correlation between woke and wanting to work more at home. So you
can sit and be a keyboard warrior. Yeah.
I think so, because you can be a bully.
Really?
And like, so like my boss was such a bully, but then when you spoke to her, I was like, come, let's have a chat, like a kitten. Just like really awkward, like, but then like behind, or passive aggressive, copy this person in, copy this in, copy, you know what I mean? Like it's this whole like written game, and it's like that's how you roll. You're an online bully, and that's how these folks were operating. So and funny enough, now what I'm doing is I'm in commercial real estate, and I've attended a bunch of social events recently where, you know, it's like you've got to. They were talking about like the workplace and workplace planning and all that kind of stuff. And people in Brisbane are more inclined to want to go into the office than people in Melbourne, interestingly, like dramatically. And I don't know if it's because of some sort of like they were locked in for so long, they just got so used to it, or if it's also because Melbourne is quite a lot
busier.
more left, if you like. So,
true.
Anyway, it's an interesting issue, but the whole
it's
work
interesting.
sort of...
You started this conversation by saying you lost part of yourself, and I think we say it all the time, but the Bitcoin community just really is like this family of people that have got so much in common. But so that's therefore it's got a bit of a culty reputation. But what fascinates me is, and I need to get better at communicating it myself, which, you know, speaking versus the written word is something I'm so passionate about, which is, we'll go back to it in a minute, is why social media gets misconstrued. But, people, the Bitcoin community is fundamentally a group of people that are passionate about the fact that money is broken and money touches every single human being. So I still have yet to figure out how to get better at communicating just how important this is, because it's not like some hobby or some football team that you're just on a different team. We're talking about money. Like, this affects everyone. It is the way we communicate. It is a way we fundamentally communicate. So what do you find is the first conversation because I'm passionate about talking and language and having in person. That's why I'm doing a podcast instead of a blog, because it's just so much healthier. And I think we all need to be out there being ideally examples of people that are able to have healthy conversations that aren't threatening, that aren't. And I 100% understood your take on exchanges being shitcoin casinos or not Bitcoin only, and you absolutely have your reasons for that, and it makes sense. But that's why we all need to be out there proving that even within this community there are people that are just so much more capable of having healthy conversations, and we need to be doing that with so many things out there. But money does affect everybody. I don't care if you're for or against LGBTQ or pride, or against the transgender argument, or for or against blue, red, left, right, woke, not woke, doesn't matter. Money affects all of us.
Yes,
and it exacerbates all of those things. If you're stressed about anything and you're also broke, you're probably more stressed than the person who disagrees with you.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a couple of things you say that are really interesting. So the one is that like Twitter's not real life. What happens in social media and all these places is not real life. Like we have these mechanisms in real life to be able to see people's reactions. I don't know what the percentage is, but something like 70, 80, 90% of communication is non-verbal. So, so much gets lost if you're going to just type some sort of snotty response. And you never know what that person's mindset is that day and that kind of thing. So, I totally agree in that regard. And I love having conversations. That's why I don't write anymore, because I find it quite exhausting and long. This is so much more rewarding. It's a bit of back and forth. And I do agree with you. There need to be more people in the community. I talk about the Bitcoin community here who are able to welcome people. So what I'm trying to do with my podcast is also try to bring people across the bridge. I don't want to just say, you're an idiot, you shouldn't have done that, you're a DJ, and get a grip. Okay, come back when you've done 150 hours of learning, and then we'll talk. I'll let you into my club. That's just not how you make this movement work. You want to have people that are welcoming. And what I'll say is that generally I was on the outside of Bitcoin for about a year in Twitter as an anon, and then subsequently came out of the Bitcoin closet and started engaging in real life. And that's the game changer, because then you see, okay, these are real people who are actually like really smart and are sincere, like serious people with integrity, like very high integrity people. So that for me that's why I'm so bullish. And it's not because I saw stuff on Twitter or followed some chart.
It's so important as well. So I think if there's anyone listening to, I think the majority of my audience are not yet Bitcoiners, because I've built an audience prior to being in Bitcoin. And so I think, people, especially personal friends who see my business profile talking about Bitcoin, and it's kind of a relatively new thing, and I've not done a very good job of tying it into why I do it or talk about it alongside what else I do, but I'm trying to refine that. And the minute you see people in person, they're like, so tell me about Bitcoin, and you're like, what? That is not a quick conversation. But I'm glad people at least want to at least say that, because for anyone who's listening who has other friends, just keep asking, because we never get sick of talking about it. But ask the question. There's no such thing as a silly question. Don't be afraid to say whatever you need to say or ask, because I think unfortunately that is a reality, is that there's so much division about everything. People are so triggered and angry about everything that people don't want to get into some kind of serious conversation of substance, because what if I say the wrong thing? And you just won't get that in Bitcoin. If you show an interest at any level, people that are in it will want to help you and get you over that bridge. And 4 hours later, you'll still be there. You're welcome.
Yes, exactly. And what I've learned through kind of my orange pilling efforts, and I'm so far from being a finished product in terms of where I think I could be, in terms of my pitch. But the first thing is I don't think it's worth pushing it on anybody. It's a total waste of time.
Like
the more
anything.
you tell people they need Bitcoin, the more they shut their ears. So I think what I've found is that the people who are sort of bit curious, if you want to use that word, those are the most interesting people, because you can get them over. The people who just think it's stupid internet money, they kind of, there's no way of trying to rationalize it. They've made an emotional decision. They've put a block. They said no. To answer an earlier question, I think what you were saying, like, how does one talk to people about Bitcoin? What I tend to do is just say, okay, Bitcoin is money, and it's the best money we've ever had. So that's the starting point. What is money? Money is a proxy for our energy. Okay, it's our stored energy. We expend finite resources that we have, time, energy. We don't get any more time. And in exchange, we do that voluntarily with other people. And in exchange, we get money. And we then try and save that money so that in the future, we can then live off of that money. And
when our bodies can no longer expend the energy. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
As well. Yeah.
Exactly. And so inflation is effectively theft, in the sense that it is stealing energy away from you. You've plowed your time into something, you've received money in exchange, and yet through no fault of your own, that is losing in purchasing power. You need to accumulate more and more of it to buy the same amount of stuff each year. That doesn't sound like, it doesn't sound fair off the bat. You think to yourself, okay, the more you earn of the stuff, actually, it's not. You have to keep earning more and more and more to be able to buy the same sort of things.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just the beginning of it. I then will talk to people about how we arrived at paper money or fiat currency. We started bartering, and then once we got into bigger tribes, we started saying, okay, we need to agree on something. We can't just swap apples for wood or whatever it might be. And slowly but surely we arrived at gold, and then eventually it became, technology had progressed so far where we were doing deals with people in foreign continents that it was a real pain in the ass, and it was high security risk to get shitloads of gold across the ocean. So what we did is we just said, you're trustworthy. I'll just make a note here, £100 of gold, and off we go.
Yep.
And then they started creating more paper than there's gold, and that's the story. So I try and plant that, but I'm not going to pretend like I'm very good, because I've got some people over the line that way, but it doesn't work. It doesn't resonate with everyone.
People care about themselves, and as do we all. And I think it's always important to highlight the fact that having this digital, decentralized form of money, it's removing the human emotion from money. It's removing the ability for human tendencies and very normal tendencies to get involved. I mean, any one of us, given enough money, even now, someone tweeted today about who do you think who's a Bitcoiner that wouldn't change something even if they were offered all the Bitcoin or something. And it's like, I don't think any one human being is above being persuaded, bribed for their price. And that's the whole point, is that we need to get it out of the hands of any one entity, because that's what humans do, So it's in
all of us, Amy. That's the point. We pretend like we're all, these are bad guys, these are good guys. We've got good and bad. It runs through each of us.
Doesn't matter.
And Bitcoin is a rules-based system as opposed to a ruler-based system. And so I'd rather trust code and maths than I would trust people, because people are people. And
people
all like
have
to
created this knowing that, it's being created by humans, factoring your philosophy in, factoring in all the stuff that you said you studied at uni, right, in and alongside law. So it was 2020 for you as well, then, the pandemic and joining the dots, because you were already in Bitcoin, but it was the mainstream media, the culture at your workplace that kind of really nailed it down for you?
Well, actually I was doing this financial planning diploma just for the hell of it, and was doing a lot of studying, and then came across Bitcoin. And so I looked at it from a macro perspective, and not everyone will resonate with that. So I was like, I've been always interested in geopolitics and history and all that kind of stuff. And so I went down this sort of YouTube rabbit hole because we all had time. And I also happened to not be working full time at that point in time. So I was actually quite blessed in that sense.
Same.
So there's lots of things that have happened that at the time were really challenging. You know, at the time I would have preferred to be full-time employed, but yeah, that would be probably better. But
paying my bills would have been nice. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, cash flow. You know, if that's too much to ask for. So, but that's sort of when it first started, and I never would have got into media but for Bitcoin, because it was the only place I knew that I could actually get in, because commercial real estate is like very much hands-on. It's like no one's going to be hiring somebody remotely, you know, to do like property management. You got to go there, you got to sort out if there's a leak or whatever the problem is. So so I guess that's kind of the that's kind of when I became I guess a Bitcoin in 2020. It was like the third time I'd like heard of it. And prior to that, I very much had, because my dad's a chartered accountant, he taught me a lot about finance, very much conservative finance principles around, you know, compound interest, the eighth wonder of the world.
Wow.
You know,
you were very
don't so like don't interrupt it unnecessarily. You know, you're not time in the market, not timing the market. Don't try and think you're smart and you can trade. That's pointless. You want to be an investor, not a trader. Investors have long-term time horizons. It's going to go up, it's going to go down. You try and pick stocks, you're going to fail, you're going to lose.
Just you
pick
got
a
all
basket
the good advice that parents.
I got all of it. So I was
you were very fortunate.
Yes. So that's what I was like saying. I'm about all these like different blessings. Of course, I've gone way far now on the risk curve, because my dad's still very much like, now he's in like late 60s and he's in wealth preservation mode. So he's like, no, I don't need much Bitcoin. So he's bought a bit, but it's like not even a tiny fraction of like, I'm like, come on, man, just do 1% for me. But he's like, but I'm trying, once I've already
yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, and it's just like, I think from his perspective, he just wants to look after what he has, and he tries to stick to what he knows, and he knows retail. And like he said something to me the other day, which blew my mind, which was like, you know, a bunch of them are working on this pet business at the moment, a private equity deal, and within 5 years they would have done 40x their money. So you think to yourself, like, I try to explain to him Bitcoin, and he's like, listen, man, I have control over this thing that I know how to make. It's like an engine. I've been doing retail for the last 30 years. I know how to make it work. I'm not interested in this tech. And it's like, okay, fair enough. I mean, I see where you're coming from.
He's in a position where he's also looked after himself. He's okay regardless. I think when you're a millennial, or you're, you know, you kind of look at it and go, we're entering midlife, or we're in midlife. If you know, right now, if we're halfway through our lives, we're assuming we'll live till 80. I think all things considered, hopefully, health issues aside, we will actually live quite a bit longer than that. So you look at it and go, I have a very high risk tolerance, but it's only because I'm looking at it going, well, to stick with the system and not have Bitcoin, we're screwed anyway. Unless you've already done exceptionally well for people in our age group, unless you've already got quite a few properties or assets in other classes, significant amounts, which most of us don't because we didn't get that education. You know, my mum retired, lost her husband, was down to one pension, and I looked at it and went, you literally can't afford to live off this. And that was when I was like,
that's so sad,
what do we do then? So my risk tolerance was always high. I've been in business for myself for about a decade, and it's like, well, what choice do we have? And people think it's, you know, you're being reckless, and the gamblers, someone quoted that at me recently, like the gambler's addiction, where you just keep losing so you put more in. It's like, no, this is like the no-brainer option now.
You're right, hey, and
because the alternative is not working.
No, it's really not. It's not working for the vast majority of people. It's not working for billions of people. And it's usually the people who have assets and who are doing fine that would say that. Put yourself in a millennial's shoes, and let's not say, like, I'll be the first to admit I've been very blessed in many ways, not only through my dad's, kind of, not just coming from like a relatively well-off family, but also all the education there and financial like wisdom that he's bestowed upon me. So that said, I'm so far from being like financially free. Like I'm nowhere near. Do you know what I mean? Nothing like that.
Yep.
And I look ahead and I think to myself, okay, if you're somebody who doesn't own assets, and let's just use property because everyone loves property, whether you're in the UK or in Australia or also in the US. Property ran really hard from 2020, and depending where you were, like I'm in Brisbane, it was 46% from the bottom to the top. Now, think about what that means for the future and for young people. Wages are stagnant globally because I think what we're finding is that, increasingly the asset prices are becoming completely out of reach for the average person. I mean, it used to be, and I know this for property, is like, it used to be like, say, 3 or 4 times your annual median household income. And you could do it with one guy or girl, like literally working full time. The other person could, I don't want to say
secure
chill,
a
because
mortgage, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Today, you need 2 people working, 2 wage earners, and you're now looking at, depending where you are in the world, 8 to 10 or 11 or 12.
It's not doable for most
in some of the most expensive places. So how are these people expected to remain optimistic? And so that's why we see so much populism and social unrest and unhappiness and division. And then what the people who have assets will do, and this is what I said at the mainstream media place, was this: it's not about left or right. Actually, it's about really centralized entities. It's top versus bottom. And what the people at the top do is they get us involved in petty squabbles around gender, left versus right issues, all these kind of little petty things. And meanwhile, they're playing the long game, and they are the wealth owners. And we're just the plebs fighting over scraps. And what Bitcoin does is it enables us to take something. We've basically front-running Wall Street. I mean, we've all been front-running BlackRock, the biggest asset manager on earth. And this is the only opportunity humanity has to be able to acquire property that is unconfiscatable, that is deflationary, and it's the asymmetric opportunity of a lifetime. It's like investing in the internet in the mid-90s. And it's the opposite of a gamble.
Yeah. I think that's almost the perfect place to kind of wrap it up, because I feel like we'll just get into either repeating ourselves or making it too technical. And everyone has their own reasons for needing to or being forced to pay attention. The biggest one at the moment is rising cost of living. I come from a background, or my most recent background, where I'm surrounded by entrepreneurs in this hustle mindset, and the mindset of it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, you can rise yourself up. And yes, you can. There is so much opportunity on the internet to create an income and to scale an income and to do better than the average. And that's great. But not everybody wants to do that. Some people want to just have a job that fits their lifestyle, that makes them feel part of something. They don't want to be a visionary or a leader, or they're not naturally that way. And they're happy to earn X amount and be able to plan the future around that. And like you say, the average, that is the masses, that is the majority of people. And I think it's just really important that those people who do want entrepreneurship, freedom to hustle and go harder, look at why they want that, because it's usually about freedom. And it's like, well, then this money is made for you. And that's where I get frustrated, because I am in this sort of world of people that are like, it doesn't matter, don't worry about the world, you just focus on you, and you can do whatever you want. And I agree with that, but sometimes like the empath kind of strikes and you go, no, this is still wrong. Something so big as money that affects everybody, especially if I'm someone who, if you are going to be an entrepreneur or work for yourself or create something, whether it's a podcast or you're creating, you might be providing jobs. You therefore need to factor in the real world. Like, I know so many people who are they're doing okay, but their pay hasn't gone up with cost of living. And then it creates tension, like you say, the unrest, the tension, the division. It's just, there's the root cause. And that's what I'm trying to get better at communicating around wherever it's affecting someone. Like, my partner has a child in another country, comes with a wealth of challenge, and had a tumultuous breakup and financial settlements and money. And, you know, there's a lot of downstream brokenness that isn't working. That just keeps people just about treading water so that they have to stay in a job and have to keep paying tax. The choice, optionality just taken away. Happiness, zip. So yeah, we're on the same page. I know you get it. That's why I'm talking to you. But I always like to wrap up. Like you're clearly a big personality. You know who you are. You were very blessed with parents who instilled a lot of clearly self-esteem and the willingness to have your own opinion about things, and you understood money. So you've obliterated the questions I normally ask anyone. But what would you tell your younger self, say graduating, going into uni? Any advice you would give your younger self about having opinions, being you, and anything about money? And you're not allowed to say just buy Bitcoin 10, 20 years ago, because you couldn't.
No. Well, I would say, let's imagine Bitcoin is not around. So I would say, listen, bro, back yourself. You've got incredible potential, and people, a lot of people like have said that before, but don't let your self-doubt get on top of you, because that's been a key thing throughout my life. Like I've had these periods of self-doubt. So that would be like the first thing. The second thing I'd say is like put aside more of your own income. I should have saved more, whether it's 10%, 20%, 30%. Now I do it in Bitcoin, and I do it in Bitcoin, but I should have been smarter. You know, like I did 3 ski seasons in the US, and I didn't save a bloody cent. And
I'm sure you had a good time, though.
That kind of thing it was a bit silly, and like I had wonderful experiences. So I suppose the last thing I would say is like all the lessons you've learned, all lessons in life are actually necessarily challenging, and it's not really what happens to you, but it's how you respond. And so everything that's happened to me thus far, all of it, all the challenges, and I sound like I've sort of been walking on diamonds and I've been blessed so much. Like I've had so many untold issues in my life, like many people, and I'm so grateful for all of them, every single one of them. And so I would say to my younger self, listen, bro, all of these things are going to turn you into a warrior. So back yourself.
Back yourself. I love it. Perfect. And I would encourage everybody. I'm actually going to link the episode that you did with Michael, because the last 5 minutes of your chat with him, and I didn't know who Michael was until we went to Bitcoin Live. Your chat with him, the final 5 minutes where you got into the conversation about backing yourself, was amazing. I just played it before we got on tonight.
Brilliant.
Because it's so good. And even if people just want to skip to that last 5 minutes where he's like, your job is just to be you and get as much out of you as you can. I was like, amen, you are speaking my language. So yes, everyone go check out Dale's podcast. I'll link it. Thank you so much. Good to meet you. And hopefully we will do it in person soon, because you're not that far away.
Yes, thank you so much, Amy. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoy what you're doing, and thanks for the opportunity to chat today.
Cool. Hello, my friend. As someone who's not the best at finishing the things they start, thank you so much for making it to the end of this podcast. I hope you found it helpful. Maybe it piqued your curiosity on something new, or even just made you smile for a few seconds. If any of those things apply here, then all my regular tech challenges and tantrums are well worth it to get this to you. If you heard anything at all that you think could help just even one other human being, there's a couple of things you can do that I would really and truly appreciate. Firstly, you can follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. On most podcast platforms, this is usually just a case of hitting a follow button or a plus sign on the main show page. This means you'll never miss an episode, which is hopefully a win-win for us both. Secondly, if you're feeling really generous, you can leave me a 5-star rating or review wherever you're listening. And lastly, feel free to share an episode with a friend on social media with any thoughts, Feedback, suggestions, or even criticism. It's okay, I can take it. Just tag me using the handle @AmyTaylorSays to make sure I see it and can thank you personally. Any or all of these things genuinely mean more human beings see and hear these conversations. So again, thank you for being here and helping me with my mission with Be You Get Paid to help as many people as possible know themselves, know money, and be happy. See you next time.